13. Dark family secrets. Black R&B legends tried to hide. What if I told you that behind the dazzling lights of R&B's biggest legends lies a vault of family secrets darker than any tabloid could reveal? From Aretha Franklin's stolen childhood to Marvin Gaye's fatal clash at home, from Prince's estate battles to Whitney Houston's suffocating family ties. These are stories the music industry never wanted you to hear. Each note of their songs carried whispers of pain, betrayal, and silence. Are you ready to uncover the hidden scars behind the voices that defined generations? Stay tuned. This is Legends of Black Excellence, and you won't believe what we found. Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin, crowned the Queen of Soul, mesmerized the world with her voice that could both command power and whisper vulnerability. Yet behind the curtain of fame was a secret she carried from her earliest years, one that shaped not only her music, but also her very identity. Born in Memphis in 1942, Aretha moved with her family to Detroit, where her father, the renowned preacher Reverend C.L. Franklin, rose to national prominence. His booming sermons, broadcast on radio across the country, made him one of the most influential voices in Black America. But his home life was far less sanctified than his pulpit image suggested. At just 12 years old, Aretha gave birth to her first child, Clarence, in 1955. The details surrounding the pregnancy remain cloaked in uncertainty and silence. Detroit gossip at the time suggested the father might have been a neighborhood boy, perhaps a schoolmate. Others far more darkly pointed fingers at powerful men within the church circle, including whispers never proven about her father himself. Aretha, fiercely private, never publicly named Clarence's father, and the speculation followed her throughout her life. The only undeniable fact is that she became a mother while still a child herself, and the choice to carry such a burden without explanation revealed the immense pressure she faced in a family determined to protect its image. This painful reality deeply influenced her artistry. In songs like Ain't No Way, the I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You, her voice carried a raw ache that critics and fans alike recognized as more than performance. It was lived experience. Each note resonated with longing, with resilience, with the unspoken truth of a girl who had to grow up too quickly. The Franklin household was a paradox. While her father was celebrated as a man with the million-dollar voice, he was also notorious for his extramarital affairs and lifestyle that blurred the line between church leadership and personal scandal. Aretha's mother, Barbara, left the household when Aretha was only 6 and died a few years later. The absence of maternal stability left Aretha even more vulnerable, creating a void she filled with music but never fully resolved. Despite these wounds, Aretha transformed her private suffering into unmatched strength on stage. She went on to raise 4 children, maintain a career that earned her 18 Grammy Awards, and become the first woman inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987. Yea, Aretha's legacy is often remembered for its triumphs: the anthem, respect her civil rights activism, and her regal presence at global events. But woven into that legacy is the shadow of a childhood secret, a reminder that legends are not immune to pain. Her strength was extraordinary, not because she was untouched by hardship, but because she faced it, carried it silently, and still rose to become the voice of a generation. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye, forever remembered as the Prince of Motown, sang of love, social justice, and spiritual longing. Yet his own life was dominated by a private storm that ended in one of music history's most shocking tragedies. Born in Washington, D.C. in 1939, Marvin grew up under the iron hand of his father, Reverend Marvin Gaye Sr., a strict preacher whose unpredictable temper created a climate of fear in the household. His mother, Alberta, provided comfort where she could, but young Marvin still endured years of harsh criticism and conflict. These early wounds bled into his artistry, fueling timeless albums like What's Going On 1971, which sold over 2 million copies in its first year and became an anthem for peace during the Vietnam War era. Despite his success, the tension at home only worsened. Marvin, often sensitive and vulnerable, clashed with his father's rigidity. By the early 1980s, financial problems, depression, and substance struggles deepened the rift. On April 1, 1984, inside the Los Angeles home they shared, the conflict exploded. A heated argument over misplaced insurance documents escalated until Marvin, distraught, shoved his father. Moments later, Reverend Gay Sr. reached for a pistol that Marvin himself had once gifted the family. He fired 2 shots. Marvin collapsed, fatally wounded, just 1 day before his 45th birthday. The aftermath left fans around the world stunned. The court later reduced the charge to voluntary manslaughter, and his father was sentenced to probation and a suspended jail term. Many felt justice was denied. How could the life of a man whose music brought hope to millions be cut short with so little consequence? Do you believe Marvin's tragic end was the result of one explosive moment? Or was it inevitable given years of unresolved conflict at home? Marvin's death remains one of the most haunting family tragedies in American music. His songs live on, echoing with the longing of a man who sang for harmony in the world, while struggling to find peace within his own walls. More than a star, he became a symbol of the fragile line between brilliance and suffering, love and destruction, family and betrayal. Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson's rise to global superstardom was dazzling. Yet the foundation of his success was laid in an environment of strict control and fear. Born in Gary, Indiana in 1958, Michael was the 7th of 9 children in the Jackson family. His father, Joe Jackson, recognized his children's talents early and molded them into the Jackson 5, the Motown group that would launch Michael's career. But what the world saw as charming family discipline was in truth a regime of relentless pressure and punishment. Joe Jackson was infamous for using physical discipline to enforce perfection. Michael himself recalled being struck with belts, cords, and even branches when mistakes occurred during rehearsals. He described nights of falling asleep on stage chairs only to be jolted awake by his father's harsh commands. These punishments were not rare but routine, ensuring that every note and dance move was executed flawlessly before the world ever saw them. While fans adored the youthful brilliance of the Jackson 5, behind the curtain was a child trembling under his father's shadow. The wounds were not only physical. Michael once admitted that just the sight of Joe entering a room made him break out in cold sweats even as an adult. In her memoir, his sister LaToya Jackson alleged far worse, accusing Joe of sexual abuse, claims she later retracted, saying she had been pressured into making them. Still, the mere existence of those accusations deepened the public's view of Joe as a figure whose authority crossed troubling boundaries. Despite this, Michael never fully condemned his father. He often said Joe's discipline made him strong and shaped his artistry, though his trembling voice in interviews suggested otherwise. The conflict within him was clear, respect mixed with unresolved fear. This duality haunted Michael for life. Even as he sold over 400 million records worldwide, shattered music records with Thriller, the best-selling album of all time, and became a cultural icon, he carried the scars of a childhood lost. Michael's story embodies the paradox of greatness, born from pain. The discipline that forged the king of pop also left him fragile, searching endlessly for the innocence he never had. From Neverland Ranch to his soft-spoken interviews, his actions reflected a man trying to reclaim the childhood stripped away by ambition and fear. Behind the moonwalk and glittering glove was always that little boy, desperate for approval from a father who never seemed satisfied. Smokey Robinson. Smokey Robinson, one of Motown's most enduring figures, built a reputation as the man who could pen love songs so tender they seemed to float in the air. From classics like Cruisin' to Being With You, his artistry made him a symbol of devotion and romance. Yet behind the gentle image of Smokey was a chapter of controversy that painted a very different portrait of the legendary singer. In 2025, headlines broke about lawsuits filed by 4 former employees, alleging that between 2007 and 2024, working in Robinson's household was less like being in the home of a beloved artist and more like enduring a toxic workplace. They claimed underpayment, denial of overtime, constant emotional strain, and even pressure to remain silent because of his towering celebrity status. To make matters worse, his wife, Frances Robinson, was also named accused of ignoring mistreatment despite knowing it was happening. The allegations shook the public. How could the man whose voice embodied tenderness be connected to such cold accusations? For fans, the contrast was jarring. Smokey Robinson was not just a singer, he was a cornerstone of Motown, a mentor to young artists, and a figure long associated with warmth and grace. These lawsuits, though unresolved, struck at the heart of that image. They raised questions about whether the sweet words he sang were reflections of his character, or simply lyrics crafted for the stage. Smokey has not been legally convicted of wrongdoing, and supporters argue that the claims remain allegations, not proven facts. Still, the case tapped into a broader conversation about power, fame, and accountability in the entertainment industry. Motown, once celebrated as a family-oriented music empire, had already faced decades of whispers about exploitation and secrecy. Robinson's name being pulled into that narrative deepened the sense that the golden age of soul music was not as flawless as the records made it sound. Smokey Robinson's legacy still shines through his music and his role in shaping Motown's identity. But the shadow of controversy lingers, reminding us that even the voices that sing of love and joy may carry secrets far harder for the world to accept. His story reveals that behind every legend is a human being capable of brilliance, but also of mistakes that can forever complicate their public image. Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder's story has always been framed as one of triumph over adversity. Born in 1950, 6 weeks premature, he lost his sight shortly after birth due to retinopathy of prematurity, a condition caused by excess oxygen in the incubator. Despite this, he became one of the most celebrated artists of all time, with more than 25 Grammy Awards and a discography that reshaped the sound of soul pop and R&B. Yet even as his music inspired millions, rumors swirled around him for decades, suggesting that perhaps the legend was hiding something about his blindness. One of the most famous incidents came during a performance with Paul McCartney when a microphone stand began to topple. Stevie reached out and caught it with uncanny precision, a moment that immediately fueled speculation. Stories circulated of him driving a golf cart, navigating crowded rooms with unusual ease, and instinctively avoiding sudden obstacles. These tales gave rise to a persistent theory that Stevie might not be completely blind, that perhaps he retained partial sight, or had hidden his condition to maintain mystique. The medical facts, however, are clear. Doctors confirmed Stevie's blindness from infancy, and Stevie himself has spoken candidly about it many times. "I can't see, but I can imagine a whole world with music." Those close to him explain the seemingly impossible moments, not with secret vision, but with extraordinary sensory perception. Stevie developed an acute sense of hearing, able to detect the faintest shifts in air footsteps or sound vibrations, giving the impression of invisible eyes. Yet the whispers never disappeared, partly because they added to his legend. Fans found the idea irresistible, a genius who could secretly see a man who fooled the world. But the truth is even more remarkable, a boy robbed of sight who built an entire universe through sound and imagination. Stevie has always handled the speculation with humor. When asked if he could really see, he once joked, "If I could, I'd be driving myself here." That playful answer turned suspicion into myth, leaving fans to decide for themselves. In many ways, the mystery only amplified his aura. Stevie Wonder's music songs like "Superstition," "Isn't She Lovely," and "I Just Called to Say I Love You" remains untouched by the rumors. If anything, the speculation shows how extraordinary his abilities are, forcing people to search for explanations beyond talent and hard work. His true secret was never hidden vision, but the ability to transform hardship into brilliance and to turn silence into timeless sound. Ray Charles. Ray Charles, often called the genius, transformed American music by blending gospel, jazz, blues, and R&B into a sound that felt both sacred and rebellious. Born in Georgia in 1930 and blinded by glaucoma by the age of 7, Charles rose from poverty to global fame, leaving behind an immortal catalog that included Georgia on My Mind, Hit the Road, Jack and Unchain My Heart. But while his public life shone with success, his private life carried a secret that only surfaced fully near the end of his journey, a sprawling family tree scattered with stories of pain, neglect, and silence. When Charles died in 2004, fans assumed his legacy was just his music. Instead, the news broke that he had fathered 12 children by 10 different women. Some of his children were well known, but others lived in the shadows, their existence rarely acknowledged until later biographies and legal documents revealed the truth. Several of the children only met each other as adults gathered in tense rooms where Charles himself admitted to living parallel lives. Years before his death, he called them together to explain how his estate would be divided, acknowledging each one as his flesh and blood. For many, that moment was the first time they realized they were part of a much larger family. The scene was bittersweet. A legendary father who gave the world his soul in song, yet left his own children fragmented and yearning for more of his presence. Charles's struggle with addiction to heroin, which lasted nearly 2 decades before he finally overcame it in the 1960s, compounded the instability of his family life. Relationships were fleeting, and the weight of fame often pulled him away from home. His generosity was well documented. He provided financial support and attempted to ensure his children were cared for, but emotional closeness was often missing. Some of his children later shared feelings of abandonment, contrasting sharply with the warmth and longing Charles poured into his ballads. The irony of his life is powerful. Here was a man who sang of love with unmatched sincerity, who could move millions to tears with a single phrase. Yet behind the curtain, he left a family marked by absence and unanswered questions. That duality is what makes Ray Charles's legacy so complex. He was both the voice of freedom and resilience, and a father whose personal choices left lasting scars. Ray Charles remains a monumental figure in music history, but his story also reminds us that genius often comes with shadows. The beauty of his art cannot erase the fractures of his private life. It is those very fractures, perhaps, that gave his music such haunting depth. Prince Rogers Nelson, born in 1958 in Minneapolis, was a singular force in music, blurring genres and identities with fearless artistry. His hits, like Purple Rain, When Doves Cry, and Kiss, cemented him as one of the most innovative musicians in history. On stage, he was meticulous and in complete control of his image, from his flamboyant costumes to the secrecy around his personal life. Yet in death, that control slipped away, unveiling one of the darkest and most complicated family legacies in R&B history. When Prince died suddenly on April 21, 2016, at the age of 57, the world mourned. But soon after shock spread, he had left no will. His estate, estimated at $156 million, including the legendary vault of unreleased music at Paisley Park, instantly became the center of legal chaos. With no spouse or children, relatives both close and distant stepped forward. Siblings like Tyka Nelson, his only full sister, became primary figures, but dozens of others, half-siblings, cousins, and even people claiming secret blood ties, surfaced in court. Some produced DNA evidence, while others leaned on memories of private acknowledgments, such as Prince allegedly telling a woman, "Your family." The situation highlighted the complexity of Prince's private world. He had always guarded his personal affairs fiercely, rarely giving interviews and often deflecting questions about family. His secrecy extended to legal matters, where he left no documented proof of his wishes. This opened the door to years of courtroom battles, creating rifts among relatives who once might have stood united in grief. The estate battle dragged on for more than 6 years, with Banks' lawyers and relatives all contesting control. In 2022, the final settlement divided his assets between 3 surviving siblings and the publishing company Primary Wave. Yet even then, questions lingered. Who were the people Prince privately supported? Did he have children or heirs that were never acknowledged? And what would happen to the hundreds of unreleased songs still locked away in his vault? Prince's legacy, therefore, is not only about his revolutionary music, but also about the labyrinth of unanswered questions he left behind. Just as his artistry defied rules, his personal affairs resisted closure. He once said, "A strong spirit transcends rules," a line that now feels prophetic. His story reminds us that brilliance often comes intertwined with chaos, and that even in silence, Prince continues to captivate the world with secrets no court ruling can ever fully solve. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston's gift was undeniable. Her soaring vocals made her one of the most awarded female artists in history, selling over 200 million records worldwide. But behind the glittering spotlight was a family life marked by control, financial disputes, and emotional strain. Born in 1963 in Newark, New Jersey, Whitney grew up in a household surrounded by music. Her mother, Cissy Houston, was a gospel legend who trained her daughter's voice with relentless discipline. Cissy's guidance helped shape Whitney into a star, yet it also left little room for independence. Whitney once admitted she felt like a puppet molded to perfection, but rarely allowed to make her own choices. Her father, John Houston, added another layer of turmoil. While Whitney ascended to global fame in the 1980s and 1990s, John became deeply entangled in her finances. He launched a management company and later sued Whitney for $100 million, claiming she owed him compensation for his services. The lawsuit, which came at a time when Whitney was already struggling with addiction and public scrutiny, fractured their relationship. John passed away in 2003 while the case was unresolved, leaving Whitney devastated yet also burdened by unresolved bitterness. The Houston family's struggles extended further. Relatives battled their own addictions, and Whitney was often caught in the middle of loyalty and resentment. Friends described her as someone who constantly felt the pressure to please, whether for her family, her fans, or her industry. Songs like The Greatest Love of All, which encouraged self-empowerment, were ironically sung by a woman who admitted she rarely felt free within her own life. Her tragic death in 2012 at age 48 stunned the world, but the whispers of family conflicts only intensified afterward. Reports of estate battles and questions of who truly benefited from her fortune continued to circulate, echoing the same disputes that plagued her in life. Whitney Houston's story is not just about a star who burned too brightly. It is about a woman whose voice shook the heavens while her heart remained shackled by family shadows. Her brilliance will forever inspire, but her life also serves as a cautionary tale about the crushing weight of expectations placed on a single soul. Teddy Pendergrass. Teddy Pendergrass was the golden voice of the 1970s, a soul singer whose electrifying stage presence and baritone captivated millions. With hits like Close the Door, Turn Off the Lights, and Love TKO, he embodied passion and power. Yet behind the adoration of fans and the luxury of fame, Teddy carried a secret pain tied not only to tragedy, but also to his own family. Born in Philadelphia in 1950, Teddy's childhood was marked by absence. His father was largely out of the picture and was later murdered, leaving his mother to raise him alone. Music became both escape and salvation, and Teddy rose quickly from gospel to joining Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes before launching his own solo career. By the late 70s, he was at his peak, filling arenas and establishing himself as one of the first black male artists to sell out stadium shows for women-only audiences, a testament to his unique appeal. Then came the night of March 18, 1982. Driving his Rolls-Royce in Philadelphia, Teddy lost control and crashed into a tree. He survived, but the accident left him paralyzed from the chest down. The world rallied to his side, fans, fellow artists, and even strangers raised funds, hosted benefits, and sent endless encouragement. But within his own family, things were not as supportive. Accounts from friends and associates later revealed that Teddy often felt abandoned by those closest to him. Much of the responsibility for his care and rehabilitation reportedly fell to his management team and outside supporters rather than family members. This silence at home contrasted sharply with the outpouring of love from the public. For years, Teddy remained quiet about it, never publicly criticizing his family, but those near him described nights of loneliness when he confessed feeling forgotten within his own household. Despite paralysis, Teddy staged a remarkable comeback, performing from his wheelchair and continuing to record music that touched listeners deeply. His resilience inspired many, but the hidden wound of feeling unsupported by his own kin never fully healed. He once said that music was the only place where he felt completely whole, a telling admission of the emptiness left in his personal life. Teddy Pendergrass died in 2010 at age 59, leaving behind a legacy of powerful music perseverance and quiet suffering. His story is not just about a car crash or the loss of mobility. It is about how even the strongest voices can feel voiceless within their own families. The world saw a survivor and a legend, but behind closed doors was a man longing for the embrace that fame could never provide. Al Green. Al Green. The silky-voiced crooner behind Let's Stay Together seemed to have everything chart-topping hits in the 1970s, sold-out shows, and a reputation as one of R&B's most magnetic performers. But at the height of his fame, Green shocked the world by stepping away from stardom to become a minister. Behind this dramatic shift lay a web of family conflict, rumors of hidden relationships, and financial tension that haunted his legacy. Born in Arkansas in 1946, Al Green grew up singing gospel before sliding into the world of secular R&B. By the early 70s, he was unstoppable, his singles consistently topping the Billboard Hot 100 and his albums selling millions. Yet fame brought pressure and whispers began to follow him. Stories circulated about romances he never acknowledged publicly, with some alleging that Green fathered children outside of wedlock. These claims were never formally confirmed, but the secrecy surrounding them became part of the mystique he carried into his later years. In 1979, at the peak of his success, Green announced he was dedicating his life to God and founded the Full Gospel Tabernacle Church in Memphis. Fans were stunned, but his decision rippled hardest through his family. Relatives and even his former management reportedly saw the move as a betrayal of the career that had supported them. When Green shifted his focus from R&B to preaching, the flow of money changed dramatically, sparking resentment among those who had once depended on his success. For audiences, the transition seemed noble, a man rejecting worldly pleasures for spirituality. But those closest to him described it as a decision that fractured bonds and left unresolved questions about what he might have been trying to bury before stepping into the pulpit. Even in his sermons, Green sometimes sounded like a man caught between two worlds. His gospel music carried traces of sensuality, as if the sacred and the secular warred within him. Despite the tension, Green managed to balance his ministry with occasional returns to the stage, even winning Grammy Awards for both gospel and soul music. His dual identity, a preacher in the church and a legend in the studio, became a symbol of his complexity. Still, the shadow of his family's disappointment and the unanswered rumors of unacknowledged relationships lingered. Al Green's story is not just about reinvention, but about the cost of transformation. He will forever be celebrated for his velvet voice, yet the choice to abandon stardom revealed the heavy personal struggles behind his success. The man who asked us to stay together was, in truth, a figure whose own family ties were strained by the very decision that defined the second half of his life. Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke, often hailed as the king of soul, revolutionized popular music in the late 1950s and early 1960s. With timeless tracks like You Send Me Cupid and A Change Is Gonna Come, his voice carried warmth, sincerity, and a vision of change. Yet the public image of Cooke as a smooth, charming gentleman stood in stark contrast to the secrets and fractures in his personal life stories his family and associates rarely spoke of openly. Cooke was born in Clarksdale, Mississippi in 1931, the son of a minister, and moved with his family to Chicago during the Great Migration. He grew up steeped in gospel, eventually joining the Soul Stirrers before transitioning into secular music. But while his career soared, his private life remained clouded by uncertainty. Records of his early years are hazy, with gaps in official documents about his parents and extended family. This ambiguity fed rumors, some claiming that Cook had fathered children outside of marriage and quietly supported them financially, ensuring they lived comfortably without ever acknowledging them publicly. Industry insiders recalled Cook's generosity, noting that he regularly sent money to women and children whose identities were never revealed. To some, this was a quiet act of responsibility. To others, it was evidence of a hidden personal life that contradicted his clean-cut image. Cook himself rarely addressed questions about his family. In interviews, he spoke vaguely about his parents, avoided discussing personal matters, and quickly steered conversations back to his music. The paradox was striking here. Was the man who pioneered soul, a genre built on truth, rawness, and heartfelt honesty, yet he kept significant parts of his life behind a wall of silence. Cook's untimely death in 1964 at the age of 33 under still disputed circumstances at a Los Angeles motel only deepened the mystery. While official reports claimed he was shot after a violent altercation, fans and family members long suspected foul play, pointing to the sudden end of a man who had just founded his own record label and was demanding greater control of his music. After his passing, whispers of unacknowledged children and unfinished business continued to circulate, casting a shadow over the perfect image the public once held. Yet despite these personal complexities, Sam Cooke's legacy remains one of brilliance and transformation. "A Change Is Gonna Come" became an anthem for the civil rights movement, sung by a man whose own life carried contradictions. His hidden family struggles remind us that even the brightest stars often lived with pain and secrets the world never fully saw. Cook gave his audience honesty through song, but the truth of his private life is still a puzzle, making his story both inspiring and haunting. Luther Vandross. Luther Vandross's music carried unmatched warmth. Songs like Never Too Much, Here and Now, and Dance With My Father showcased a velvet voice that felt like comfort itself. Yet the emotional depth behind his performances stemmed from personal shadows, loss, loneliness, and the absence of stability in his earliest years. Born in New York City in 1951, Luther was the youngest of 4 children. When he was just 8 years old, his father, Luther Sr., died of complications from diabetes. That absence left a deep mark. Raised by his mother, Mary Ida Vandross, Luther grew up in a modest apartment where financial strain was constant. His siblings worked hard to help, but the weight of survival often left little space for emotional closeness. Luther himself later admitted he found solace in records and hours at the piano, creating a world of sound to fill the silence his father's death had left. This sense of incompleteness lingered into adulthood. Friends described him as warm yet guarded, a man who poured his feelings into ballads rather than conversations. His mother, though loving, was stretched thin, and Luther often felt like he was chasing the presence of a father who could never return. It is no coincidence that his 2003 song Dance With My Father, written decades later, became both his signature hit and his most personal confession. The track resonated worldwide, earning him Song of the Year at the Grammy Awards because it carried the ache of a son who still longed for what was taken too soon. Despite superstardom selling over 40 million records globally, Vandross rarely spoke about his private life in interviews. He sidestepped questions about romance and family, instead letting his music do the talking. In 2003, Luther suffered a severe stroke, limiting his ability to perform. He passed away in 2005 at just 54 years old, leaving fans with a body of work drenched in both beauty and unspoken sorrow. His songs remain timeless, but beneath their elegance lies the story of a boy who grew up too fast, carrying loneliness that fame could never erase. D'Angelo, born Michael Eugene Archer in 1974 in Richmond, Virginia, burst onto the scene in the mid-1990s as the Prince of Neo-Soul. His debut album, Brown Sugar 1995, sold over 2 million copies, and his follow-up, Voodoo 2000, won a Grammy Award, cementing his place as a generational talent. With his smooth voice and raw musicianship, many hailed him as the natural successor to Marvin Gaye. Yet behind the acclaim was a darker reality, crushing pressure from family and expectations that nearly destroyed him. Industry insiders revealed that D'Angelo's family often placed enormous financial hopes on his shoulders, expecting his success to secure their futures. That burden weighed heavily on him, creating a conflict between his love for music and the sense of obligation to provide. Instead of freedom, fame became a cage. Rumors circulated that his long gaps between albums were not laziness or disinterest, but the result of emotional exhaustion and pressure from both the industry and his own household. By the early 2000s, D'Angelo virtually disappeared from the public eye. Friends said he withdrew to escape the demands placed on him, wrestling with depression, addiction, and the weight of being seen as the savior of soul. His 14-year absence before the release of Black Messiah in 2014 reflected not a lack of creativity, but a man struggling to find balance between art, family, and survival. Fans often judged him harshly, branding him a recluse who wasted his potential. But those who knew him spoke of someone suffocated by the competing forces around him. D'Angelo eventually returned, his music sharper, more political, and more vulnerable. Yet his story stands as a reminder of the unseen toll fame can take when family and financial expectations turn talent into a burden. He is celebrated not only for his artistry, but also for his survival in an industry and family dynamic that nearly consumed him. Behind every timeless R&B anthem lies not only genius, but also secrets, pain, and unresolved wounds that shape the music we love. From Aretha Franklin's stolen childhood to Marvin Gaye's fatal family conflict, and from Whitney Houston's suffocating home to Prince's estate of mysteries, these stories remind us that greatness often comes at an unthinkable cost. The question remains, should we judge legends by their hidden family tragedies or cherish the art they gave us despite the shadows? Share your thoughts. Below, this is Legends of Black Excellence, where the truth behind the music lives on.